My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north, general of the Felix legions, and loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
So powerful.
The true emperor, Marcus Aurelius.
Your voice just keeps getting deeper and deeper.
The true emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Put some bass on this voice.
Well, welcome to Binge the Bible Bonus Features, a podcast where we get into the details we didn't quite have time to get into in our sermon. I am Caroline. I'm our host. I'm joined here by our resident nerd.
Hello, everyone.
Title by popular demand, Pastor Jason, and our lead pastor, Pastor Jeff.
Always great to be here.
Guys, this is the end of the Old Testament. We've already done binged all that.
We did.
And now
we did. Just when you thought that the Old Testament was done, we came back for another week.
Another one.
Yes.
One more.
For the Intertestamental Period.
That just sounds smart when you say that word.
It's good that you say that slow, though.
Yeah, I'm scared.
Intertestamental Period.
I'm scared to say it wrong. Yeah. So, Pastor, you preached a sermon. If for those of you that are listening or watching that maybe you're not familiar with our church, we're Lifepoint Church. We're a church in coastal North Carolina, and this is the end of season 6, which sounds impressive. 6 seasons of anything means somebody's listening or watching, of Binge the Bible, and we've been doing all the different books of the Old Testament. I say we because it feels like a collective effort, you know? I'm here too. But now, and we do a podcast just to kind of go along with that, but the Old Testament's over, and so this one, intertestamental.
Absolutely. And, just to quick back up for a second, so we were debating on whether or not to actually have a message dedicated to this intertestamental period. And if you're thinking, what in the world is the intertestamental period? It's basically the gap from Malachi to Matthew. It's about a 400-year period, and it's known as 400 silent years. And so it was like, well, should we do a message on this? And as we kind of put our heads together, realized, one, this season's a shorter season. It had really 3 books of the Bible that we were discussing. We had the time. And I think it's really important to understand what does happen in that gap, because one of my main points is that while God was silent, meaning that there was no recorded word from God or no active prophet, while he was silent, he was definitely not absent. He was very active. And I even brought the idea that much like a grandmaster at chess, he's moving the puzzle pieces, and really world empires, he's positioning them, letting them rise and fall, creating the stage for the Messiah to step in. And so I do think it's very critical. It's also, I wanted to just go on record and say, a history buff I am not. So this message was so far out of my comfort zone. And what was interesting was at our first service, which happens at 8:15 a.m., when I walked off stage, I was like, that was a lot of fun. I was like, let's just get through this message and hopefully something connects. But what was wild is God really used this in a neat way. We saw, matter of fact, 30 people indicate to us that they put their faith and trust in Christ because of this history message. And I chuckled because the Bible says that God will use the weak things of the world to shame the strong and the foolish things to shame the wise. And I'm like, that's me. Like, God is using, I am a history fool. I barely got through history when I was in school. And here I am teaching a history lesson.
Well, and I enjoyed it because you're even throwing up like the names for the rulers and the dates and the places. And I was like, I'm loving this.
Well, I had no question that you were going to love it. But I was like, okay, so one person's going to like this message and everybody else is going to be asleep. And I don't know that many fell asleep. If you did, just don't tell me.
But the relevance wasn't lost either, because just the picture. And honestly, my big push for even wanting to do a week like this was just because, I think we've seen binging through the Old Testament, the reason more people don't get into the Bible, first they may think, oh, it's hard to read, it's hard to follow, I don't really understand. We've kind of like debunked that. If you follow the story and read the Word, God illuminates, and it's also, there are a lot of fun things, gripping things, dramatic things that happen through the course of the story, but I also feel that one of the reasons that people don't get into the Bible and study more is because there's just a lack of contextual understanding. Yeah. They don't understand the context of the time, so they don't know how to apply it for now. And I thought you did a great job of like building that context, because you even mentioned it in the message, was that, everybody has those times where they feel like God's silent, but is he silent and inactive? more than likely he's still working.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely where my mind was at. We've all experienced what feels like the silent treatment of God. And most of the time, the reason we feel that way, it's not necessarily that God's not speaking, it's that we're not listening. And God was very active. One of my takeaways was that actions speak louder than words. And if that's the case, if that really is true, then God was very vocal throughout this 400 years, just not in the same manner in which he was in the 2000 that led up to that. So I wanted to kind of share this. I talked about this in the message, but and I don't want to reference too much of the message, but in full disclosure, I put everything I know in this period into the message. So I may just sit here for the rest of the podcast and let Pastor Jason do all the talking. But part of what made me really want to do this message was a friend of mine, shout out to Rich. He texted me and he said, if God took a break from us for 400 years, what did the people do in that time? How did they maintain faith? And he was just saying that he and his wife were talking about it, and it was almost like a little sad. And it was kind of like, was God just like, that's it, I'm done with you? And hopefully what you see after this message is that God was definitely not, I'm done with you. But I think he did give us that space. It was, I like to think God loves us enough to give us what we ask for, knowing that so often we have to get what we want only to discover that it's not what we need. And I think that we had ignored God and ignored God and ignored God, and it was just like, okay, I'm going to go do my thing, and I'm going to let you do your thing, and but I'm not giving up on you. And I think that's what we see as we work through this 400-year period. So just if you ever kind of think, man, I don't understand God, it's because you don't understand God. I don't understand God. That's why we talked about Isaiah 55. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. And so if you're ever like, man, I just wish I could have a better understanding of God, same. Our finite minds will never fully grasp who he is. And so even this 400 years, I'm sure that I missed a lot of what God was doing in that period. But I do know he was fulfilling prophecy and he was setting the stage. And like that grand master, he was putting those, what are they called? He's moving the pawns. Were pawns, and I don't even know, rooks. What are the other chess
like
pieces?
Rooks of the castles. You've got the knights. You've got the bishops, the king and queen. I'm not a chess player. I just know the pieces.
I got knights. That's about it. And
All I
queens
got.
from Harry Potter. What?
I know
And
what
then
castling is.
Yeah.
That's the only move I know is castling.
Castling?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
That's where you switch like the
What is it when you go king me?
king me.
Well, is that checkers?
That's checkers.
Okay, never mind.
We're
Which
playing chess, not checkers here.
So let's get in it. Let's talk about 400 years.
well, you started with Darius. I just wanted to say Darius because that is the first time I've been able to remember. I always
Darius.
say Darius. It's
I
Darius.
don't like
Is there a Darius here? Darius?
Hey, Aaron.
But you started with him, and just how everything connected, and that was with Daniel, correct? I just think it's cool how it even kind of started there, that flow. Because if you look at looking at the culture from the Jews then, again, just to kind of like reinforce why they're called Jews and not Israel, because we see that transition through the Old Testament. They were the Hebrews, and all of a sudden they're Jews. Well, it's because whenever the southern kingdom was finally taken over and they were exiled, they began to know them as Jews because they were from the kingdom of Judah. And that's why they're kind of known as the Jews still. And so you see that transition. But if you look at the New Testament time when John the Baptist is on the scene, making the way for Jesus, their living conditions, their context is way different. And that transition apparently started with Darius.
So that whole thing, I mean, it did start with him, but you could even take it just a notch back to Nebuchadnezzar. Mm-hmm. And let's go there for just a moment. Again, I don't want to recap the message, but I do think that it's critical for us to say, like, how amazing that Daniel, he's taken into the first wave of exiles, okay? So 605 BC, Daniel, kind of the who's who of Jerusalem, get hauled off to Babylon. He's one of those guys, and if you remember the whole story of Daniel, he's like, I don't want to eat food that was, from the king's table. I don't want to defile myself. And so he's like, test me for 10 days. Give me just vegetables and water. See if I'm not better off than everybody else. And he was. And so obviously God's favor was on him. And then, so he's a part of kind of the advisors to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has that dream. And he's like, I need you to tell me the dream and tell me what it means. And so I read the interpretation of it, but I thought I'd back up just even a little bit further for our time together. And in Daniel chapter 2, let's see, it was verse 29. We'll go to 27. This is even better. So bottom line, what's going to happen is that all these advisors and magicians and astrologers, they're all going to get murdered because they can't do it. And Daniel is in that, like he'll get killed as well. And so Daniel prays about it, and then he's like, all right, I'll do it. So imagine they get Daniel ready. They bring him before King Nebuchadnezzar, who obviously has a very short fuse. He's just threatened to kill, and not just kill. It's not like I'm just going to kill you, but I'm going to have you torn limb from limb. That's aggressive. And so in verse 26, the king asks Daniel, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mysteries he's asked about. So I love this. He's like, can you do this? He's like, actually, no, I can't. He's like, well, what are you doing here? But he's not done. He says, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He's shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. This is what I wanted to emphasize in our bonus features. He's showing you what's going to happen in the days to come. And then he says that your dream and visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in your bed, they are these. Verse 29, your majesty was lying there. Your mind turned to things to come. The revealer of mysteries has shown you what's going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else. He's like, look, it's not that I'm smarter than the rest of these guys, but this has been revealed to me so that your majesty may know that the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Verse 31, your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue. And we put up a picture of this statue on the screen. And he said, here's what the statue is. It was enormous. It was dazzling. It was awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold. Its chest and arms of silver. Its belly, thighs of bronze. Its legs of iron. Feet partly clay, partly iron, partly baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet. Iron and clay smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So I didn't read that. I read the interpretation of it, because you notice there he's like, this is your dream. To which if you're Nebuchadnezzar and that, like to that level of detail, someone tells you your dream, you're like, okay, this dude is the real deal. Like whatever God he's connected to, there's something legit there. And then, of course, if you keep going, he unpacks in verse 36, here's what it is, the gold head. That's Babylon, that's you. Then he goes down to like the torso, and at that point he's like, it's silver, and that represents the Medes and the Persians. And then we go a little bit lower, and it's bronze, and that represents Greece. And then a little lower, it's iron, that represents Rome. And then there's the part iron and part clay. It's a divided kingdom. And then there's this rock cut out of a mountain that's hurled down, and it crushes the whole statue. And that's actually the kingdom of God, because that is going to become a kingdom that will never be torn down. And so all of that it comes from a dream, but it's foretelling what's to come. And the reason that I wanted to start there is because we go from this vision, we walk through everything we've discussed this season and Binge the Bible, we finish up Malachi, and it's like where the Bible ends, history books pick up. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, well, what happened? Well, guess what? Everything that he predicted begins to happen through these empires. So it's kind of neat that what God gave him in a vision is actually what our history books record. Yeah. What's the likelihood of that happening? To me, that's just absolutely crazy. And then when you realize the reason for that is because God is moving these pieces right where he wants them. He's giving, like, certain rulers were very opposed to the Jews and oppressed them, and then there were others that were favorable to them. Yeah. And it's just neat the way God did all of that to set the stage for the Messiah to come.
Yeah, and it's good. And it just connects so many dots, and that's, again, it's so important for us to go through the context and the history for what's happening so we can understand why some of these things are so important. So one of the things I wanted to do today, Pastor, was just kind of talk through some of the things that exist in the New Testament time that didn't exist in the Old Testament time, and how it happened, how it got there. And I will say this, this will be a very general discussion. Most of this discussion, I mean, if you're in college for this, it would take years to go through. We're going to try to answer and go through and just kind of
do it in like 5 minutes.
Introduce it. Yeah, so we're going to solve all those problems and answer all the questions.
We
in 5
should issue,
minutes.
like, for those who have watched every episode, we should have like some kind of a degree that we give. It's not really worth anything, but it's a certificate. It's a certificate of completion.
We'll be able to email you a
I love
certificate.
that. Yeah,
You can frame it and
Finish
put it
the
on the
Bible,
wall.
master's degree.
that's great. I love that.
But building that reference is super important. And so one of the things that we discuss is, and actually, Pastor, I did get this question earlier in the week. So is he going to preach on the book of Maccabees?
No,
Are
because
you
he's
gonna preach
never.
through that?
You know, I don't know why you said Maccabees, and I thought about Applebees.
Ew.
I don't know why that popped
Well,
in
just
my
so
head.
everybody knows, the Applebees in Leland, North Carolina, is alive and well, and they're
Ew.
always packed.
I actually
That's
want
a
to.
great
I
mystery.
actually. So for what it's worth, this is no bearing on the podcast, but I want to start a group called the Chain Gang, and we actually only go eat like once a month. We go eat at chain restaurants
Some of them are good.
to save
Only
them,
once a month.
To save
Like,
them,
if you-
some of them need
like Chili's.
I was gonna
So,
say if you could
Golden
put
Rabas.
golden. Okay, don't
Golden
act
Corral.
Carrabba's right now. Carrabba's is good.
I'm just saying, but if somebody doesn't go there, it's going to leave. Applebee's.
Golden Corral currently, which I will not be going to, by the way, is getting a remodel, and I'm like, funded by whom is my biggest question.
I would
Who's
be
going
one
to
of those
Golden Corral?
people. I get the meat
Ick.
sweats every time I go there.
Anyway, sorry that we went from Maccabees to Applebee's to join my new small group that goes and eats at chain
Well,
restaurants.
if you pick one chain, what is it?
I want all of them. I want to because I never go
Olive
there.
Garden.
We live in a. For those of you that are not from here, we're in a very foodie community, and I'm all for it. But because of that, I never go to these places. Like I think Chili's has like a trio for like $9.95.
I
Yeah.
love Chili's. I'm a Chili's fan.
So anyway, we digress.
Garden is
So yeah, you said
I do love
people
Olive
asked, are we going to talk about the book of Maccabees? No, and here's why: because I've never read it.
Same.
I have never.
Great answer.
Look,
That
let's
is a
just be
great
real.
answer.
Reading the Bible cover to cover is quite the feat.
Yeah.
To read some extracurricular material from that era, I have just
good.
never. I'm not saying that I never will, but I've never read it.
Do you have like a year, like a 1 year Bible or something that you go through, or how do you do that? Like,
So for me, yes, I like. Well, I don't do it every year. My Bible reading is most consistent when I have a plan. It's kind of probably very similar to like watching Netflix. Like when you have a show, you have a plan, and then you get to the end of the show, and you're like, I don't know what to do now. And that's where I'm at. I will like preview a bunch of plans. So the best thing for me to stay consistent in my time in the Word is I do the 1 year Bible. And I like to actually use the 1 year Bible. I know there's a lot of variations, but I read, 1 or 2 chapters Old Testament, 1 or 2 chapters New Testament, Psalm, Proverbs, and then you'll end up going through Old Testament once, New Testament once, Psalms and Proverbs maybe twice in the course of a year. I really like that.
Yeah.
Now, I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, the Catholic Bible includes
It does. Yep.
the Maccabees.
They recognize it. Yeah. In fact, the 14 I think there are 14. 14 books that aren't included in our canon, they recognize. The apocryphal books.
Gotcha.
I don't know all the names, but I do know some of them. But I mean, I'm sure we could look it up real quick. I probably got it in a note here somewhere. But
Yeah, well, so you want to talk about Maccabees, so go for it.
okay.
Applebees.
I know everything there is to know. Actually, I've never read the whole thing either. I've only ever used it as just like a source reference, and really just because in fact, one of the professors that I loved in college, he was a Hebrew scholar, and he would quote from this thing all the time. But he always quoted from it just to validate places and dates in the Old Testament and Intertestamental period. You do have to say that kind of slow, don't you? Intertestamental.
How many syllables is that?
Intertestamental 6.
It's mental.
Hey, good job counting that off, Caroline. Good job. But it's a great book just to corroborate places and dates. So it's good, but it's also like it leads to one of the biggest questions, because through that intertestamental period is where most of the apocryphal books were found, written, and it's always been kind of curious that they weren't canonized in the Old Testament scripture. They weren't in the Septuagint, or I think part of them were, but then they weren't recognized later as the official like Hebrew Old Testament. So the reason that works, most of it is because, well, I did kind of find this out just through some study this week. So some of this you may have to look up on your own. I'm not positive, but one of the things I did discover is that because of the descendants of Judas Maccabeus, that's who basically led the Maccabean revolt, and kind of where we got all of that information. His descendants were called the Hasmoneans. That's kind of who took over after they kind of won the temple back and started reestablishing. That would have been like late BC, like a 160 something or somewhere in there. But because they were they were frowned upon basically by the leaders, in rabbinical rule, they were frowned upon, and so they didn't want to use a writing that celebrated them. And honestly, it was because of they were, they reaped the rewards of that action and the fighting and the revolution against the Romans. But it was also, it's just like how we see like the Zealots of Jesus' day. There was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of, I would say, like situational ethics, like ethics not grafted from the Old Testament teaching. They were situational. The ends justified the means. So the violence justified the end goal. And a lot of that stuff they didn't want to celebrate. And again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm making a really long story short. And so that was why they didn't want to use any of that book to celebrate something that they didn't fully agree with. Now, when it comes to like the other books that would have been written there, probably the one that's most quoted is the book of Enoch. Like there's Enoch 1, Enoch 2. I've always kind of equated it with some of the source material is just kind of weird for some of the apocryphal books. Some, like the book of Enoch, there's some pretty cool information. But it's just like, Pastor, do you use any outside sources to study the Word of God? Are there any books that have inspired you and you enjoy reading?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. But do you take them as like the written Word of God?
So no. I compare what they're saying with the text. I try to find out, like, all right, is this just some crazy idea? Is it validated through the text? Does the text interpret? Like, you always want to let the text interpret the text. So I don't want to just go off of what one person said. I want to find out if it's proven through, through the scriptures.
Yep. And much like some of the tests, like one of my favorite Sunday messages that you've had is, can we trust the Bible? And that's where you kind of explain the testing that goes through when we test things against the Word of God and how they were canonized. There's got to be the authority, there's got to be the authorship, there's got to be the transcripts, or the manuscripts and all this stuff. One of the reasons that most of these books were not accepted is because they didn't really know who wrote it, because more than likely Enoch did not write the book of Enoch. It was collected through the ages, probably passed down on oral tradition, but they couldn't corroborate a finding, so they didn't know, they didn't have an authority for writing it. Some of it didn't test against the information and what they already had, and they knew that was inspired of the Word of God, and so they didn't include it. One of the other reasons we don't really see any of these books, and we know they weren't put in the Old Testament, but the reason they weren't canonized in the New Testament, because these are books that were written during that intertestamental period, is because Jesus never quoted from them. More than likely, the early church did have some of this material that they used, and it wasn't super frowned upon from what I've seen, but Jesus never quoted from it. He never affirmed any of it. He quoted from the law, and then he inspired the guys that ended up writing the New Testament. So, and that's kind of where we get it, is there's always it's always stemmed from God endowing authority, which, it speaks to that because there were no active prophets during the intertestamental period. In fact, I love that Pastor Kevin brought up in our last episode that John the Baptist would have been considered the last Old Testament prophet. But even he didn't have any miraculous signs or didn't write his own book. And so it's just kind of cool things to notice. And to me, it didn't seem quick, but it's a really quick, easy answer for why those books aren't incorporated or canonized in the Old Testament or the New Testament. And so for all of you asking that question, that's kind of just a quick answer. But even to go back to the book of the Maccabees and why that was such a big deal, most people don't even know that book really exists. In fact, outside of our circles, I don't know that anybody's ever really talked about it.
Well, and really, all I know is this. Jews were living under Greek oppression. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we talked about Hellenization, which is interesting. When I started studying, I was like, I remember that word, but I couldn't tell you what in the world it meant. Like, literally, guys, I paid no attention in history class.
Same.
And so to come back and go, that's what that means. And okay, so basically, if Alexander the Great conquers your region, like two options: become Greek or die. And so he's, now you've got to learn, the Greek language and Greek customs, culture, all that stuff. And so the Maccabean revolt is Judas Maccabees begins to lead this revolt, this uprising that overtakes them. And then eventually that leads into Greece and Rome in the Battle of Carthage, which anytime something is like a nod of the hat to a more modern, like a movie or something, like when I was studying and it was like as referenced in the movie Gladiator, and I was like, oh, yes,
I've seen that.
I've seen it. I know this one.
That's how I feel all the
this
time.
one. It was, yeah. So for those of you that just tuned back in because I said Gladiator, yeah, that's a part of. I mean, like that Battle of Carthage is Maximus. At some point he either leads them in or out or back out of that battle. But anyway, just kind of a cool. What we do in this life echoes into eternity. What a great quote. What is the one where, hold on, what does he say? My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north, general of the Felix legions, and loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
So powerful.
Gosh.
I thought you just knew that for a second.
No, I pulled it up.
I was really impressed.
I know most of it, but I was afraid I'd get some of it wrong.
It's like a monologue you've done before. I like that.
It's so good.
That was a good movie, I will say.
The true emperor, Marcus Aurelius.
Your voice just keeps getting deeper and
The
deeper.
true emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Put some bass on this voice. So anyway, that was the Battle of Carthage.
And isn't it cool how all this incorporates with the actual story of the Bible? It kind of makes you wonder if God was in charge of the whole thing. He set the whole stage. And I
think he had something to do with it.
I do love how you put that in. Like
Yeah.
he was setting the table. I love that. I love that language and that picture of him working and doing. I mean, one of the other things that because you brought up the idea of Bethlehem. Like, what's Bethlehem?
Bethlehem.
Where's that? Why would it wasn't a big deal really in the Old Testament outside of that, but in the New Testament it's going to be like this is the staging point for where we're going to see the Messiah. And so like that's one of those things like that's got to kind of come into the story. Other things that have to happen, or other things we do see happening, and this is kind of a question that I used to have a lot. I would ask this back before I really got into my own study. Is like, why is it that they were worshiping at synagogues and Jesus would visit the synagogues when it should have been just the temple? It's something I've never really heard a lot about. And so I thought it was kind of a cool thing to bring up, just to maybe get ahead of some of the questions.
Bring it up. Talk about them synagogues.
Well, so like one of the things, just there is like a belief that the idea of the synagogue would have started in Moses' day. Most scholars and in rabbinical teaching, they don't really affirm this, that it would have started in Moses' day, just in kind of the house meetings before the tabernacle. That's not really affirmed again. But where we do see the tradition really begin was in the time of Alexander the Great, because he allowed them to continue to worship, and that's where they got the Septuagint, correct? The Greek Old Testament. But one of the first places that archaeology tells us could have been one of the first synagogues was in Egypt. And it was because it was removed from Jerusalem, because at the time they had the temple, but there were Jews now being spread all over that couldn't visit the temple, and they needed a place of worship. And so it's just interesting how this started happening. Also, one of the things you even brought up yesterday, Pastor Jeff, and if you want to take this and kind of do a little more explanation, but the Roman roads,
yes,
comes into play.
Yeah, which to me the really neat thing about that was Caesar wants these roads built. One, because the way that you expand an empire is that you take over these regions, you get your currency into that region, and if you're the emperor, there's a high likelihood that your image is on that coin, which is now expanding throughout the region. So it's a demonstration of your expanding dominion and kingdom. But one of the best ways that you're going to be able to dominate this region is to put roadways in. Prior to this, I mean, you had little paths, but they went and they literally I mean, they didn't pave it, like they didn't bring out like the heavy equipment like we have today, but they created these roads, 50,000 of them. And what is just fascinating to me is when you stop and think, okay, God allowed Rome to take over and to set up an infrastructure by which the gospel would then travel. Yeah. Like, I just picture it's like, thank you, Caesar. And not only did you set up an infrastructure by which the gospel would travel, you actually created an opportunity for this census to be taken. You know, it's interesting because usually I teach out of the NIV. It's the Bible that when we talk about open your Lifepoint Bible, it's a New International Version of the Bible. But and the NIV doesn't use this language, but the King James Version does. And we go to Luke chapter 2 where it talks about, that he's going to call for a census, that everyone's got to go back to their hometown. And the King James says for all the world to be taxed. Well, the NIV doesn't say that, but that's the reason that he's calling for this census. Well, why does he suddenly feel a need to tax the people? Because they broke. Because he spent so much money. I mean, every building project goes over budget. And when the government's out of money, what do? They just go to the people and they tax them some more. I mean, that's what happens in our world. And so we experience a heavier tax. Well, everybody's got to go back to their ancestral town so that they can find out how many people are here. And once we know how many people are here, now we know how much money we need to raise and how much we need to tax them. So it's like if they hadn't put these roadways in, there wouldn't have been this census. Joseph and Mary would have never had to leave Nazareth. They could have comfortably given birth there in their hometown, but instead now they got to go back to their ancestral town of Bethlehem. I think that's the correct way to say it. It's real phlegmy.
Yeah, we'll get that mic cleaned.
So they go 60 to 70 miles into the third trimester to this little town. This like, I mean, it's like nowhere on the map. I think one of our services, it'd be like, Burgal, okay? Love Burgal, beautiful little town, but it's like, where is Burgal? That would be like Bethlehem. Like nothing was happening in Bethlehem. Yeah. And so here they are. Why else would they have gone to Bethlehem other than the fact that they had to for this census? But also, the prophet Micah, 700 years earlier, literally put a bullseye on Bethlehem, that this is where the Messiah is going to be born. And he even acknowledged Bethlehem is a nowhere town. But a ruler is going to come out of you whose roots are from ancient past. And so we know that, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the Word. He's eternal. And so to me, it's just kind of wild that all of this transpires to get Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem to give birth to the Messiah in this little town, and that would not have happened if it wasn't for 50,000 miles of roads.
Yeah, and to me, it's even you even see multi-use because eventually they use those roads to go out and spread the good news of Jesus. But even moving into that, we were talking about synagogues originally. Those roads continued the need, but also gave a solution to the need for why they use synagogues, for a place of prayer, place of learning. In fact, that's what synagogue is. Actually, the word synagogue is a Greek word. I always thought it was just a Hebrew word that was kind of left in a Greek text. I didn't realize it was a Greek word. Synagogue is a Greek word. The Hebrew,
I think we all knew that, though.
Well,
If you have your,
I sure did.
I'm glad you guys did. Yeah. But the Hebrew word, Pastor, you may need to help me with this, but it's Beit Knesset.
Yeah, no, it's bait. It's bait.
Beit
Knesset.
Knesset. Okay. Beit Knesset.
Beit Knesset.
And it literally means house of assembly.
No idea.
I was like,
as everybody knows, it's Beit
that's
Knesset. Just say it quick.
Say it
with
with
confidence.
authority. I'll buy it. It sounds good. But that's the Hebrew word. But there are other words and there are conservative Jews that say it and use it differently. I did find out that there are Reform Jews that they call it temple. They go to temple. So if you hear modern day Jews say they're going to temple, they're probably Reform.
They don't say we're going to the temple.
They replacement for the temple.
It's like when people drop the from Walmart.
Yep. Because they consider
it. No. Nowadays people add the. Yeah, sorry. They add it. My bad. I got it backwards. We're going to the Walmart.
The Walmart.
Yeah, no.
No, it's the Walmart.
That's how we say it in Brunswick County anyway.
Sorry.
The Walmart.
That had nothing to do with this.
Going to the Walmart. But actually, they do say the temple. So they're going to temple or the temple. And some of the language that got used, but that was the use for the roads. They used the roads to kind of put synagogues, so Jews that had been scattered or hadn't made their way back or had gone other places could have those houses of worship or houses of prayer. They're multifaceted now. But the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting was in rabbinical literature, synagogues were referred to as little temples. Little temple. Kind of made me, and this is a loose association, but it just made me think of like in Jesus' day that the Christians were called Christians first at Antioch, and we know the term Christians means little Christ, and now we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. We're little Christ with the little temple. I just thought it was a great association because we're seeing Jesus completely take over, and I love that. I just love the picture of that. But even taking it back to the Maccabean revolt and why that was such a big deal with the book of Maccabees is because something we learned throughout studying the Old Testament. And Pastor, you said this really quickly, like where the theme of the Old Testament is
a promise-keeping God and a promise-breaking people.
I love that. And typically when they broke your promises, how did they do it? It was intermingling. It was bringing in aspects of other religions. It was hedonism, which we saw a lot with the Greeks and even some of the Roman culture. And you see that happening. One of the reasons for that Maccabean revolt and for them, even after they won the revolt and kind of started reinstating the temple practice and temple law, was they were bringing the Jews back to conservative Jewish foundations. And they reestablished the role of the priest. And that was where we got a lot of the rabbis. And a lot of that wouldn't have happened had we not had the roads and had they not been building other places to kind of spread that word as well. And so they were really bleeding into all areas of society. And it's just cool. You look and see that God is saying things, I'm going to do this, and man would say, well, we can't do that because here's what we lack. And he spent those 400 years supplying ways for everything to be answered.
Here's a thought, and I feel like we've covered this period pretty well. You think about these 400 years, okay? And you go from literally Babylonians to Medes and Persians to Greece to Rome, which I guess is really more like closer to 600 years. But you think about, like, these were empires that you thought nobody will ever take down.
Yeah.
And sometimes I stop and I think about, like, even for us today in the United States, I think we're the most amazing country on the face of the earth, but empires come and empires go.
Yeah.
And, you think about how in that time period, I mean, just kind of wild to think. Makes you wonder, like, will there be I don't even want to think about it, but a post USA?
I don't think anybody wants to say it, but, you kind of have to say, I've always believed that if the Babylonian Empire or the Assyrian Empire or the Greek Empire or the Roman Empire, if any of those can fall, I believe any empire can and will fall.
So maybe this could even be like a wake-up call to those of us who would call ourselves Christians to, like, are we really living out the Gospels? Are we honoring God and keeping covenant? Yeah. Or are we, much like Jerusalem, ignoring God, his ways, and therefore rejecting his hand? And just like God raised up the Babylonians and then the Medes and Persians and so on and so forth, would God go so far as to discipline us?
Yeah.
Now, you could make a case that was, his people, but then you could make a case that as, New Testament, Gentiles, we are also children of God. So again, I'm just speculating here, but I do see this as a good opportunity to say, hey, let's wake up, men and women of God, and let's stand for the things of truth. In a world that is basically like, hey, you do you, and I'll do me, and it's my journey and my truth, I think we need to go back and go, no, this is God's story, and it's his truth. And when we get on his page, he'll protect and provide. And so what would it look like if a promise-keeping God partnered up with promise-keeping people? Boy, what could God do, and what kind of blessing would we see? So anyway, that's kind of where I look at this and go, we go one or two ways here.
It's true.
Intertestamental period.
Intertestamental period. I think we've all said it correctly so far. And that,
so far.
Out of everything, is what I'm the most proud
Time's
of.
not over yet.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I got on that, guys.
Yeah, I think I've tapped out on my information on the subject.
Yeah,
for
I got
sure.
to. My brain hurts a little bit.
Do Do we feel like it's time for an unofficial ad sponsorship?
Absolutely.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, Pastor Kevin's not here, so there could be a snake in the bag. You never know.
I honestly am so
I send him snake videos all the time.
Wait, I go first a lot. Do you want to go first? You never get to go first.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Thank you. I appreciate
That feels like that was a mistake on my part because I'm
But now, I will say, like, my personality, I get overwhelmed with options and possibilities.
Oh, then I wish I hadn't given you any.
Ooh, there's something sharp in here. I like things
What's in
that
the
are sharp.
bag?
What's in a bag?
Yeah. Sick. I actually got something. I know what it is.
I'm glad you do.
It's a clam grabber. You just grab things with your clam. Right?
Stop.
No, actually, for all your stirring and flavorful needs, if you need to add to, Pastor Jeff has an electronic contraption. This is how we do it old school.
My hydrogen water.
This is how we make hydrogen water. You put whatever flavor in here. It's probably meant for like spices or tea. No way, man. I'd put sugar. I'd put like the dust from Sour Patch Kids. Stir that water really fast. Get it nice and flavorful.
I'm sorry. You actually when you're done with a bag of Sour Patch Kids, you do something with the remnants?
You dump it into your mouth.
Yeah, you don't leave that in there. That's the best part.
Or you lick your finger.
I call it the sour
Fun
dust. It's
Oh,
like magic
man. Fun Dip is one of those, I love a Fun Dip.
dust. I love Fun Dip.
We had Fun Dip in our Lifepoint Kids Prize Hub for a while, and kids were like, "What's this?" We got to introduce a whole new generation to Fun Dip.
Well, if you're looking for a way to spice up your liquid with Fun Dip, or you're making me nervous, Pastor.
You're making me nervous.
Like, put it in your
Canceled. You're
clam
the
grabber and stir it up.
Please stop.
My turn. I go.
For the love of God, somebody else please go. Ah. Oh no.
Oh, I know these. Okay, so these are called flying saucers, and I know these because behind the cameras is none other than Abby, who brought these back. England, am I correct? All right, so these candies, we got to open them, and we'll all experience a flying saucer candy. So.
Have you ever wondered what styrofoam tastes like?
Yeah, this is almost like eating a styrofoam packing peanut with like a powdery, sugared, soury.
It's a
Like a
communion.
saucer toy. It feels like a toy.
It's like the communion wafer in the little creamer cup.
This is
what they
the next gen of communion.
Hold on.
If you could put the juice on the inside, let's all eat. Ready? On 3, here we go.
Oh.
This is definitely not keto.
It's also not good.
These are great, and it's a good thing we ate them because they're good until May of 2023. So, just in the nick of time. This is the second thing that was either expired or almost expired that we
Actually,
featured. I think Abby's just cleaning out her.
my second
pantry.
bite was pretty good. That was good.
I don't know how you bit that into multiple bites. All right, is it my turn? Oh, ugh, that was off-putting. Oh, it's a tube of some kind, and I hate it. Oh, great, it's foot cream. Honestly, I love Burt's Bees. So listen, when your heels get a little cracked, I'm walking down the Roman road here. Foot cream by Burt's Bees. Here we go. There we go. Actually, I'm gonna steal that. She's not gonna let me steal
Can I
it.
share a funny story about that stuff?
Foot cream?
Yeah, about Burt's Bees specifically. So my wife is amazing, Stacy. I know you're probably listening to this, and I'm going to share this story because this is one of the few.
Hope
times-
she's somewhere relaxing, putting her feet up.
I hope so. I think she is.
Putting her foot up. She broke her leg. She has no option but to put her foot up.
But I'm not super gullible, and typically nobody can really prank me. Most people don't sneak up on me, and now everybody will. So I just shot myself in the foot.
Yeah.
But no pun intended. But with the foot cream, one night we were rubbing her feet, and I love natural food. Like if I can pick food without preservatives and stuff like that, I'm like, that's perfect. Any product that's all natural, I'm all about. And so she's like, yeah, Burt's Bees, it's originated in North Carolina. It's all natural. She's like, you can even eat it, and it's really good. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, it's like coconut, honey, all the stuff. Burt's Bees, it's got bees and stuff. So I was like, oh. So I dipped one finger and I tried it, and I was like, Buddy the Elf in Elf. It was literally the worst thing I've ever put
Stacey,
in my
I'm so
mouth. And
proud
then there
of
was a
you.
little thing on the back that said, "Don't eat."
Do not eat.
So
Man, they should really label that.
she
Yeah.
got me really good.
Good job, Stacey. We're proud of you.
And that's why he is the way he is.
Yeah. Now we know.
You want another one?
I'm good. Thank you. What flavor was yours?
Was
Mine
it
was-
flavors? Mine was yellow.
A sherbet-filled colored wafer disc.
Sherbet.
Sherbet.
In the South, we say sherbet.
Yeah.
Sherbet.
Where?
That's because you're not reading it correctly.
I didn't say we could read, Pastor. Pastor, I did not say we could
S-H-E-R-B-E-T.
read.
There's no Bert at the end of it. It's bet.
Listen.
Sherbet.
Something we're gonna do
Sherbet?
is throw an extra R into a word. Sherbet.
Sherbet. Like castanets.
Those little.
I'm not dancing. I'll do a lot of things. I'm not dancing.
Well, now's our time where we go to the doggy bag, the little box, the doggy bag section.
A goodie bag?
No, not a goodie bag. It's a doggy bag.
It's a doggy
Those are
bag.
totally different things.
Actually, Pastor, when you're at a restaurant, how do you ask for it to go
you weren't
box or
here.
doggy bag or?
So I do this.
I would ask for a to-go box.
But what do you do with your hands?
Yeah, how do you
I
ask
get it
for
to go.
it?
Yeah, I probably do. Can I get small?
Without even thinking, yep.
Will you share with Pastor Jeff what you do?
Yeah,
it's a
because
little
I'm asking
crazy.
for a to-go. I asked for a to-go bag as well, but I say bag. Can I get a bag? I need a bag.
Like, what is that? And Pastor Kevin does this.
He wants
Take
some all
over
of
the
it.
whole
He
table.
wants to pay his check.
So if you guys are
Clean his
listening
flesh,
and not
his
watching, let's try to describe. With my hands, I'm making the shape of a little box, which is also what Pastor Jeff does.
Right, because I don't want. I want a small box.
I do want a
I don't
small
want
box.
a large box.
Get me a giant box. And I always say little box. Pastor Jason is doing a weird, like,
'Cause
salt
I want a bag because I'm probably going to eat it as soon as I get home.
Yeah, it's.
I don't save anything.
And Pastor Kevin just put his hands all over the table, like, waving it around like
everything.
crazy. Yeah, he's like, wrap this whole table up for me.
Like last 10%.
Yeah,
I'd like to take this home.
I'm gonna take the last 10% of my meal. Okay, so anyway, that section, doggy bag, little box. I don't know. I mean, we talked. Oh, side note before we do that, we did talk about the idea of doing like a Old Testament Q&A. You've asked it, we're answering it kind of thing. So if you guys have questions, you can email like on anything Old Testament, how things are related. If you have questions back from any of the books or any of that, you can email podcast@lifepointnow.com. Just shoot us some questions. We'd love to just have a whole extra podcast just based on all of that. I think it could be fun. So
That'll be interesting.
yeah,
Literally all 39 books. What do you want to know?
yeah. Ask
And
really
the
hard questions.
intertestamental period.
Yeah,
And what we'll do is we'll actually take a little time to do some research instead of being like, that's a great question.
yeah.
Next question.
We will not be doing them on the fly.
Yeah, we'll come back in a few weeks with that one.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So make sure you submit some questions and all of that. But yeah, so doggy bag takeaway, any of that from?
I'll jump in. It was the second takeaway that I presented, but it's the actions speak louder than words. The silent period is really not a silent period. It's a preparation period. God was actively working, moving. And so, sure, we didn't hear from a prophet, but we saw the hand of God positioning pieces to present the Messiah. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah, mine was definitely the reminder that silence and absence are not the same. And so even just, I've had conversations with a lot of friends recently about like, I just feel like God's silent. And, we know the like, well, if you feel far from God, it's not him, it's moved. Like, and those things are definitely true. But also I feel like sometimes they can come with like on our own selves, like a spirit of shame of like, you're right, I am far from God. It's my fault. I suck. It just kind of perpetuates the whole idea of that. And so sometimes like there are just periods of time where it's like God is more silent. But even the way that you said it, maybe it's just tuning your ear to hear him in a different way is a good reminder. So that was helpful for me.
Yeah, that first one was my takeaway too, and kind of for the reasons you both said, even leading into that second takeaway from the notes. But I was just reminded, I mean, through that 400 years, and so many people still walking out, so many people still believed, and you see that kind of bleeding into that first part of the New Testament, because you think about the faithful ones, like John the Baptist, father, who he was told that he was going to have a son. He was then couldn't speak. And even and I forgot his name, but he was the priest that was told he would see the Messiah before he died.
Yes.
Remember his name?
Simeon?
Yeah, I'm drawing a complete blank.
Look at me.
But to me, it's just a firm reminder to stay faithful. So when you read that takeaway, Pastor, my mind immediately jumped to Ephesians, where it said, "When you've done all you can do, just stand." And stand in the faith and understanding and the knowing that God is still working, even though he's not speaking. Now you got to find his name, don't you?
Yes.
I couldn't remember. I started thinking and I was like, oh no, what's his name? I can't
Even
remember.
John Mark Comer has that new book out, Practicing the Way. Have you read that yet?
Yeah, I haven't. I ordered it.
It's really good, and I'm not finished with it yet, but one of like the spiritual disciplines that he talks through is silence and just solitude and silence before the Lord. And boy, is that one of the hardest things. Like that is so tough for me.
And this is not introducing a new topic, but just while Pastor's looking for that, in my study going through the workings of the synagogue, they placed more value on getting together and praying than they didn't place a lot of value in praying by yourself.
Yeah.
Jesus came and didn't take away from the value of praying together. In fact, we see the New Testament reminding us, get together, don't forsake the assembly. But Jesus also put a new value on solitude, prayer, individual relationship.
Yeah. That's good.
It's awesome.
I don't know. I'm over here searching, and I'm not sure which gospel it's in. So
What's somebody?
it's somebody's name. Wait,
Is it Herod?
you didn't.
Wanted to know.
Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon who was righteous and devout. I was right.
Yep.
You were right.
I know a thing or two about a thing or two.
Look at that.
You study it long enough, something gets in this old
Something. You knew it.
bean.
This old bean. All right. Well, end of season 6. I mean, I hope that we come back for season 7. I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, and I tell you what, you guys, we have zero clue what the New Testament's going to look like. So
Oh, I thought you were going to say what it's about. I was like,
no, we have a pretty good idea what the New Testament's about. No, what I'm getting at is so we've tried to maintain a 30,000-foot view. It's like it's an overview on a weekend, and it's going to be like, how do you unpack a gospel
yeah.
in a weekend? That is so hard. So I don't know. You guys, the writers are going to be hard at work in the off season putting this together.
I'm excited.
And
to
by
see what
writers, I mean
you.
yours truly.
Yeah.
Pray for me.
Our writing staff for sure. Well, guys, thanks for joining us today. Wherever you're here, listening from, watching, all of that, make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you for season 7 of Binge Bible.
Goodbye.